Well, I'm running for school board because I want to get some, I think, pretty simple and also pretty powerful things done for our kids. We have great schools here in Palo Alto, but like any organization, I think that there's room for improvement. I've spent a great deal of time over the last couple of years myself and working with a group of community members around working to improve, make improvements in the schools, specifically in the areas of social emotional well-being for our students and increased academic achievement for all kids. And we have some successes in that area that I'll talk about. I'm sure we'll get to those later. The specific areas that I'm interested in working on are, first, increased social emotional well-being for kids. We're famous for a couple of things in Palo Alto. We're famous for high achievement, and we should celebrate that. But we're also well known for high levels of stress and kind of associated issues like sleep deprivation and so forth. And I think that we can and should make progress in that area while maintaining and even increasing academic achievement. In fact, the academic literature has very happy news on this. That is that that happy kids and well-rested and kids are better learners, and we can get the benefits of that in Palo Alto, and we are making progress on that. The second is higher achievement for all kids. That is supporting achievement of all kids by lifting the floor, but also making sure that there is no ceiling. And I think we can do that by inculcating a growth mentality in our schools, the idea that every child can learn and improve, and that the way to do that is to make sure that every child is challenged appropriately, that we enable them to stretch to reach their potential, and that we provide the kinds of scaffolding and support that we need to do that. And this is an area I think where we can really make great use of teacher professional development and also building bridges to some real centers of excellence in the community. For example, Stanford. I mean, we have one of the great centers of innovation in education literally across the street, and we should be making better use of that. Another area is making sure that we are enabling innovation in our schools while also making sure that we're delivering to every child the best services that we can. I think that there's definitely room for improvement in this area. And for example, Schoology is a student information system that we've purchased at the district level and that is available for every child in the sense that we've purchased a site license for it, but it's only being imperfectly implemented across the district. So for example, it's 100% implemented at JLS, it's partially implemented at Jordan, and it's not at all implemented at Terman. It's going to be 100% implemented at Pali, but it's not going to be fully implemented at Gunn. And those kinds of things are a missed opportunity because Schoology, for example, enables powerful conversations once everybody is involved in it. Another area where I want to make improvements is on transparency and accountability on the school board. I think we all agree that we do our best work when the public's business is done in public. And I think there have been concerns in that area that I think are legitimate. And I will work to make sure that the public is fully engaged and fully informed about what is going on the school board. I think the public should know what school board members know, and that produces the kind of participation that we need.
How will the school board be different as a result of your serving on it? How will you make an impact on the school board?
I think I'll have a positive impact in several ways. One of them is that we will pay more attention to data. We have an enormous amount of data about student achievement, about student and parent reactions to the services that the district provides. We are not at this point very good at using that data. In fact, a lot of the contributions that I've made and others have made have been about bringing data that is already in the possession of the school district to the attention of the school board and senior staff. And that has, for example, led to the realization that our counseling system at Gunn is providing less effective services than our system at Pali, and that's led to the whole process of change that's now underway in improving counseling at Gunn. So I think that's one area. Another area is clarity of decision making. I think it's important that the school board make clear decisions. That is, that it make decisions, that it hold votes and is accountable for them, and that those decisions are clear, that they're stated in a way that can actually guide the work of staff. I don't think it's fair to staff or to the community to have to discern the intent and the will of the board by listening to hours of conversation or trying to parse minutes. And I also think the third is a clear focus on goals and metrics. That is, we should be able to define what it is that we want to achieve by decisions that we make. We should be able to associate goals with those that we're accountable for and that we can use to hold staff, accountable for, meeting expectations. And when we fail to, trying to understand why that is.
You've been both as a representative of We Can Do Better and individually been an active observer and participant in school board meetings. And in some instances have pretty harshly criticized the work of the board and the superintendent. I wonder how you're going to make a transition from being an outside critic that's applying pressure on these people toward your policy objectives and actually be a co-trustee and actual policy maker.
Well, actually, a lot of the successes that we've had over the last couple of years have been because we are already working, and I am already working in that kind of collaborative relationship. So, for example, on the homework committee, I served as a member. I worked with Charles Young, the associate superintendent, very closely to bring data and research to bear on the problems of homework and to reach a unanimous consensus among parents and teachers and administrators on that committee. So, I have already have a pretty long and successful record of working with district staff and board members towards consensus. I've spent a lot of time with individual board members, and one of the reasons we've had focus goals to reduce unnecessary academic stress for the last couple of years is because of the kind of one-on-one, individual, collaborative work that I've done with board members. I think as a board member, what the people send us to do is to work with each other to find where that majority is. And I think the way that you do that is you talk about data, you talk about shared goals, you look for the compromises that will that really do represent where the majority opinion is. It's not necessarily always going to be the consensus opinion, and that's why we have a democratic system, but it definitely should be the majority. And I think the way to do that is to be respectful and collaborative, but also clear. And that's what I'll do on the board.
So to the point of respectfulness is probably the right opportunity, the right time to ask, and we would normally ask about a candidate's spouse, but your spouse has been as active as you have been in arguing her and your positions in front of the board. She's been publicly criticized for, among other things, emails that she's written to senior staff that contain profanity, that contain references to the manipulation of the process by those individuals, and even suggesting that Charles Young return to where he came from in Pleasanton. That doesn't set up a very respectful environment for you as her spouse to come in and constructively work with the very people that she's engaged in that kind of communication with. So can you address that and how you're going to overcome that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first thing I would say is that Michelle is a very enthusiastic and outspoken advocate and quite passionate. The other thing I would say, though, on this specific topic of, I think it's an email, actually, that you're talking about, or a little chain of emails, right. Is that the context for those emails is what hasn't been clear. And I can talk in a minute about how those emails actually came into the public view, which I will. The context of those emails is actually a quite close personal and working relationship between Michelle and Charles Young that preceded that exchange, and that in the context of those of that relationship, those emails were actually an attempt by Michelle to help Dr. Young through what was a quite difficult political situation that he found himself in. The homework committee had done its work, had unanimously recommended a policy to the board which included time limits, and Dr. Young had indicated that he was going to remove those limits from the policy. And Michelle, I think, saw that as a decision that was going to produce a problem for him, and was really strongly recommending that he not do that. And in fact, I've spoken with Charles about this several times, and that's how he understood that exchange. What got released into public is a cut and pasted version of that exchange, first sent to the board for reasons that I still don't quite understand, but then released to the public, that doesn't really capture that context. So in terms of the substance, in terms of the question that you ask is, well, how will I overcome that issue? I actually don't think that there is an issue there. I think that, I have a very close relationship with Charles Young. We've spoken about this many times. He has appreciated the kind of connection that we built in the context of the homework committee and other things. I've sat down with other senior district leaders, for example, Dr. Skelly, a couple of weeks ago, and we had a great exchange on what it would be like in terms of serving on the board and the issues facing the district and so forth. And I've been strongly supportive of many members of senior staff on work that they've done. I think the other night at the forum, I praised Dr. Skelly yet again for his leadership on educational equity in the district. So I don't see any issues there.
So just one more question on this and then we'll move on. Have you and Michelle talked about, if you're elected, what her role would be and what the role of We Can Do Better would be, and whether the two of you will cease your involvement with We Can Do Better? How is that going to be managed, and what can voters expect in the way of post-election behavior?
Oh, sure. Well, I would say three things. One, I'm the one running for election, so I'm the one who will be serving, and I'll be serving myself. Second, my wife won't be involved in advocacy before the board or in an advocacy organization, so she'll step back from We Can Do Better. Others will step forward and have stepped forward. Kathy Sharp and Wynn Hauser are now taking a leadership role in We Can Do Better. And I think that's appropriate. I think that organization, like lots of other organizations in Palo Alto, has a real place in the process, and that will continue. But it won't continue with me, and it won't continue with Michelle.
When Barb Klausner announced that she would not seek re-election, she issued a statement, and in that statement, she portrayed the work of the board as being not what she had envisioned when she ran, and she basically cited the frustration of not being able to actually implement policy, or the challenges of implementing policy in a culture that is very much site-based. And I wonder, the comments that you've made in this regard, and you can expand on them here, would suggest that you come with a similar mindset in terms of your goals as a board member, but you're coming into an environment that has been described by a frustrated departing board member as difficult to overcome. So why will you not become as frustrated as Barbara Klausner apparently did? And how do you describe your views towards this culture of site-based decision-making?
Well, I think that in thinking about site-based decision-making, and I think in terms of all of the management practices of the district, we need to focus on what is the purpose of the schools. And the purpose of the schools is to deliver an excellent education to every child. And the obligation of the district is to do that in a way that's fiscally responsible and that makes best use of the resources that we have. Site-based control is a management perspective and tool that is intended to do that, and when it doesn't, when it gets in the way, then we should do something else. I think that there's plenty of evidence that in the district we have continued to support the idea of site-based control past the point where it leads to unequal educational outcomes for kids and services delivered to kids, and when it leads to inefficiencies and to waste. I've already mentioned Schoology, where we're paying for a student information system, which is really valuable. That's why we're paying for it, but we're not delivering it to every child. Counseling at the high schools is another example. You know, we now have had 2 different systems at the high schools: teacher advisory at Pali and a traditional counseling model at Gunn for 20 years. We even have a strategic plan goal from 5 years ago that we're going to improve counseling at the 2 high schools. Yet it wasn't until we brought data forth about the differences in the counseling models that anybody even thought that we should take a look at that difference and see if it mattered for kids. We have, you know, a proliferation of different anti-bullying practices and social and emotional programs across the schools. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is that really the best use of the resources that we have? Now, in terms of, and when the answer is no, when the answer is, well, we've looked at this practice and we see that we're delivering services that are not working as well across the district, that we've innovated over here, but we haven't managed to bring that across, then, you know, then we should do it. And if we're wasting, you know, resources, then we should do that differently. And I think that's also the answer to how we proceed on these individual cases, right? I mean, we can't develop some general principle of site-based control that is going to lead us to the right conclusion in every case. But in every case, what we can do is we can say, is what we're doing here consistent with our goals of equal services, equally excellent services across the district, and fiscal responsibility? If it is, that's great. If it isn't, then we should do things differently. And I think those points are where we can agree with each other. You know, that's the point at which I would want to focus the conversation, is let's look at the services that we're delivering. Let's look at how well we're doing for kids. And I think that there are shared values around that on the board and in the community. And I think that, you know, if we can get to that point, then we can kind of move past these discussions about management ideology and do the right thing in terms of individual decisions.
Do you have a sense of what types of programs would be best implemented on a district-wide best practices kind of basis versus those in which schools should have the authority over them?
Well, I mean, if we have schools that are not significantly different from each other, but, you know, in terms of population or mission, then our presumption, I think, that they should be doing things in similar ways. You know, Melissa actually said at the March counseling meeting, you know, we have 2 high schools that are quite similar to each other. Why do we have 2 counseling models? And that's the kind of question that we should be asking. In cases where there are significant differences, then it makes perfect sense to have variation. For example, there's a college-bound program at Bering Park School which reflects the fact that there's a population of kids there that needs more support in terms of access to, in terms of achievement, and in terms of, you know, of raising that achievement, that growth mentality. So that's an example where, you know, we have a clear reason why we want to have a difference. We also do want to enable, and I support innovation at the school level, but, you know, at some point we need to say, well, is this better? If it's better, then we want to bring that benefit to other schools. If it's not better, then we also want to raise that up to the level that we're delivering to other schools in the district.
The argument is made that each school has a wealth of professionals who can innovate, can assess the culture of their own individual sites, and that is a reason, a good enough reason, for a lot of the decisions to be made on an individual school-by-school basis, because there'll be buy-in. That perhaps there won't be as much buy-in if you have the kind of top-down approach to implementing a program.
Well, I think that buy-in is one of the requirements of a change process. Buy-in doesn't mean that we have to wait for changes to occur to people, you know, distributed through the system, and wait for them to, and I think I've heard the word organically, come to the conclusion that this practice over here is better than the one that they're using locally. One of the reasons that we have a unified school district and a central administration is because they have a different view, not a better view necessarily, but a different view across sites about what's working and what's maybe not working as well. I think we also have to realize that we, as board members and as a district, are accountable to parents and students for producing comparable services. And if we're not doing that, then we're violating a fundamental part of the contract that we have with our students and parents.
Are you, with regards to the board's role in site-based decision-making, are you saying that really these need to be handled on a case-by-case basis, where when there's a policy discussion, there needs to be along with that a discussion as to whether this is one of those issues where the board should exercise its decision-making authority as opposed to its guidance? Or are you saying that it's possible to develop an actual written policy that describes where the line is? Because there's really nothing that articulates this culture,
Right.
and there's nothing that articulates the boundary between board policy making versus this process of things organically, as you say, coming up through the sites, reflecting buy-in from their staffs. Where's that line, and how do we find it?
I think what we do is we look at results, and we look at whether we're actually meeting the goals that we have. Are we delivering comparable services? Are we doing it in a fiscally responsible way? Does the proliferation of different, for example, anti-bullying programs across the district represent a wise use of our resources? I think that it makes sense to prefer to allow local flexibility where it takes good advantage of the particular professional strengths of teachers and administrators and so forth. But it doesn't make sense when it leads to these kinds of unequal outcomes. So I would certainly say that we should never end a conversation by saying, oh, we have site-based control. And that's why we have this otherwise inequitable situation. What we do when we do that is that we confuse a tool, right, for a value or an end. And the site-based control should be a tool for getting better results. And if it's not getting better results, then there is no other reason to be using it.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that there really does need to, your approach would be to make it a topic of discussion essentially every time you have a major issue.
Yeah, I think.
Rather than create a general policy that describes when the board's implement a plan as opposed to adopt certain goals and allow plans to...
Yeah, I think that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, is what I would say about this. And so what we ought to be doing in every case is saying, are we making the best decision for kids? And I don't think that we'll find the answer to that in an abstract policy. I think we'll find the answer to that in the details.
So one very simple example of district-wide decision-making as opposed to site-based decision-making is the school calendar. Mm-hmm. You are a supporter of the shift in the calendar. I know you've got you don't necessarily agree with all aspects of it.
Right.
That was a contentious issue. It divided the board on a 3-2 vote. Can you describe how that process, you would have handled or urged your colleagues to handle that process differently, regardless of what the outcome ended up being?
Well, I think actually we have an opportunity to, this is a practical question, not just what would have, because we obviously have this decision coming up again. And I think that the right thing to do when we're looking forward to a decision, particularly one where the obvious options are not making everyone happy, is to put some time and effort into exploring whether there's a wider set of possibilities. And I think in this case, we heard at the end of the process, unfortunately, some options around unequal semesters, around an intercession. Debbie Whitson at Pali had some ideas. I think Dr. Skelly at the last meeting mentioned the possibility of trimesters. There's obviously a lot of possibilities that we need to start now in exploring and making concrete, so that when we are actually in the next decision process, we have some alternatives that will give us what we want, which is a stress-free winter break for kids, but that will do it with lower cost, if possible. So I think that the reason that I support the calendar decision is because within the range of what was possible there at the end, and given the fact that this was a bargaining issue, this delivered an important value, which is a work-free break. I would like the next time to have more options that make that value, achieving that value, less expensive in terms of, for example, starting earlier than many parents would like.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you would, if there's someone to be held accountable for this process not having gone particularly well, it would be the staff for not having brought forward the range of options and opportunities. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think the staff could certainly have done a better job there. I think the board also could have given more guidance.
Well, that's where I was going with the question. Where you see challenges in the governance process of the school board, and let's just use the calendar as an example.
Mm-hmm.
How do you distribute the responsibility between the superintendent and his staff and the board for achieving a good process?
Well, the board is fundamentally responsible for the governance of the district. And I think an important role for the board, an important success for the goal is to ensure that the superintendent is successful. So if part of making the superintendent successful in this case would have been to look forward and say, you may not realize this, but in the community there is a lot of concern about this decision going forward, and we need to develop some more options. And I think had the board done that and made that clear, I think we would have had a better process. In a sense, you know, if everybody is doing their job correctly, and the board is making decisions, which is its role, and the staff is implementing those decisions and sort of putting the meat on the bones, then we will get concerned less about sort of who's to blame for, you know, having dropped the ball. And I think that's where we want to be.
In terms of the high school counseling decision and the process that's going on right now, where do you think the breakdown occurred between the board and then the superintendent and the school? Because there was a great deal of upset of you know, gun teachers, gun community members thinking they're just going to impose this thing on us.
Well,
TA program.
I think the breakdown was a breakdown of leadership, and where I would particularly locate that, I think, is at the board. The superintendent, the school board took a look at the data that came back from the report. They said these are really huge differences. We need to give direction to GUN to get comparable services, to come back with a plan for comparable services, and to consider teacher advisory. The superintendent disagreed with that, and he sent a memo both to his senior staff and to the board, you know, laying that out. The right response for the board, and the response that I urged them at the time repeatedly and vigorously, would be to put that back on the agenda and have that conversation in public so that the policy difference between the superintendent and the school board could be resolved. And the superintendent had a different perspective on, you know, he expressed it quite clearly that for him, college counseling was by far the most important component of counseling, and that the social, emotional, and academic advising components were less important. That conversation didn't happen until the end of May in public, and that meant that the private process at GUN was really out of whack with the public process. I think that the right thing to do in terms of leadership would have been to go to the staff at GUN and say, we appreciate the work that you've done, and I appreciate the work that they've done. These counselors are working very hard. We want to help you become more effective. Now, this change process that we're talking about is going to be, you know, it's going to be disruptive. It might be difficult. It's going to involve training and so forth. But at the end of the day, here's why we think we need to get there, and here's why this is going to result in an improvement in the values that we all care about. And I think that's that missed opportunity is the really biggest missed opportunity, because we could be in a process of right now of transitioning to a better counseling system for gun students, you know, which is, and instead we have, you know, unfortunately, you know, a process that's going to take, I think it's going to get us there, but it's going to take us longer.
And that was a decision that the board should have given to Skelly. And
I think the board, once it realized that there was a difference in opinion between the superintendent and the board, should have brought that back and had that conversation in public, absolutely.
Okay.